The airplane was humming softly, a gentle vibration that seemed to match the rhythm of the passengers' hearts. Outside, the sky had turned a deep, dark blue, and tiny stars blinked faintly through the oval windows. Inside, most people had already settled into their seats, pulling blankets over their laps or leaning back, closing their eyes. It was late, and a long flight stretched ahead. In seat 14, sat a single father, quietly looking out the window. His eyes were tired, a little red from weeks of sleepless nights, but there was a quiet determination in them. He carried a worn leather bag at his feet, a few important papers inside, including his carefully prepared resume and some documents for an interview he had flown across the country to attend. It had been a long time since he had flown alone. Normally, trips like this required careful planning and the costs were heavy, but he had decided this opportunity could change everything for his daughter. He straightened his back in the seat, took a deep breath, and whispered to himself, "This is it. Just focus." Next to him, in seat 14B, sat a woman dressed in a sharp suit. Her hair was perfectly styled, but a few stray strands had escaped, hinting at exhaustion. She was known in the business world as a highly respected CEO. Her phone and tablet were spread across the small tray in front of her, filled with messages, emails, and schedules. But tonight, she seemed tired in a way no meeting or presentation could fix. Her eyes, usually sharp and alert, were heavy. She leaned slightly against the seat, closed her eyes for a brief moment, just to pause from the whirlwind life she led. For the first hour, they both focused on their own worlds. He quietly reviewed his notes, checking that nothing was missing. She tapped away at her tablet, sending a few urgent emails, then leaned back to rest. The airplane's soft lighting created a calm atmosphere, though the faint murmur of conversations, the whirring of the air conditioning, and the occasional announcements over the speaker reminded everyone that life was moving on the ground below. Then it happened. The woman's head slowly drifted to the side and, without realizing it, came to rest gently on the single father's shoulder. He froze. A small jolt of surprise ran through him. He looked around nervously, hoping no one had noticed, but most people were busy with their own activities or trying to sleep. A few passengers glanced over and whispered to one another, but it wasn't loud enough to disturb the calm of the cabin. His first instinct was to move away, to politely shift, but something inside him stopped. She looked so utterly exhausted, and for a brief moment, he saw her not as a CEO, not as a powerful woman he had only read about in news articles, but simply as a human being who needed rest. A small, gentle thought settled in his mind. If just letting her rest a little would make her feel better, then maybe that was worth a little personal discomfort. He adjusted slightly to make her more comfortable without waking her. Her soft breathing was steady, her face relaxed. It was rare to see someone so powerful completely let go of their guard. For a few minutes, he simply sat there, careful and still, feeling the tiny warmth of human connection in a way that didn't involve words, status, or pretense. Around them, the airplane continued its slow, steady journey, and life felt suspended, almost sacred in its simplicity. After some time, a light turbulence shook the plane slightly, causing the woman to stir. She lifted her head with a small start, realizing where she had leaned. Her cheeks flushed a little with embarrassment, and she quickly adjusted her posture, smoothing her suit and trying to regain composure. "I'm so sorry," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. He looked at her with a small smile and shook his head. "It's okay. You look like you needed the rest." His voice was calm and sincere. There was no teasing, no awkwardness, just honesty. She blinked a few times, taken aback by the kindness in his tone. Usually, people reacted with curiosity, nervousness, or even intimidation when they realized who she was. But him? He treated her like any other human being, and that simple act of respect caught her off guard. The small moment opened a door. They started to talk, first with simple, polite conversation. She asked about the trip, and he shared that he was flying for a job interview, explaining that it was important for his family's future. He mentioned his daughter, her drawings, and the small joys that kept him going even when life seemed overwhelming. She listened quietly, genuinely interested, nodding occasionally. The tone was different from the usual corporate exchanges she was used to. There was no hidden agenda, no networking goal, Only a father sharing his story. He showed her a small drawing his daughter had made, a crude, colorful sketch of him in a suit with a wide smile, holding a briefcase. Below it, in her uneven handwriting, were the words, "Good luck, Daddy." She studied it for a moment, and her eyes softened. She could see the love, the hope, and the pressure this father carried. He wasn't just another passenger. He was a man living a life full of responsibilities and sacrifices, someone who deserved more than just a passing glance. As they talked, she started to feel a little lighter, as if a weight she hadn't noticed pressing on her shoulders had been lifted. For the first time in days, she wasn't thinking about stock prices, quarterly reports, or deadlines. She was simply listening, engaging, and human. It was a quiet, unremarkable moment to anyone else on the plane, but for them, it was the beginning of something unexpected. Around them, the cabin lights dimmed slightly. A few passengers had dozed off, their heads leaning against windows or each other. The faint hum of the engines filled the quiet spaces between words. They continued their conversation, sharing small personal stories, laughing quietly at minor frustrations, and amusing incidents from life on the road. The single father mentioned the small routines he and his daughter had every night before bed, the bedtime stories, the small dinners he prepared when time allowed. She responded with tales from her childhood, the pressures of growing up in a competitive environment, and how she rarely got to just rest and be herself. In those hours, a connection grew. It was not romantic nor dramatic, but deeply human. Two strangers, worlds apart in experience, had met in a fleeting moment that neither could have planned, yet both were richer for it. The single father realized that being kind didn't require recognition, and the CEO realized that being powerful didn't mean she had to carry everything alone. The airplane's journey continued, the landscape outside invisible in the darkness, the stars twinkling faintly in the distance. For the father, the hours ahead still held uncertainty, an important interview, the weight of responsibility for his daughter, and the lingering worries about whether hard work alone could truly change their lives. For the CEO, the hours ahead were filled with strategy, decisions, and the constant pressure of leadership. But in this small cocoon of calm and understanding, they had both found a moment of clarity. When the turbulence finally subsided and the quiet of the night settled back over the cabin, the conversation slowed. They didn't need to speak constantly. Silence felt natural. Sometimes, human connection is not measured by words, but by presence, by the simple act of being there for another without expectation or judgment. As sleep began to reclaim them both, the single father leaned back and let his mind wander. He thought about his daughter, her bright eyes, and the life he was fighting to build for her. He thought about the small joys he often ignored, the smell of home-cooked meals, the warmth of a hug, the sound of laughter. And he thought about the stranger beside him, exhausted yet unpretentious, reminding him that even the busiest lives sometimes need a pause. The woman closed her eyes again, careful not to intrude on his space this time, but feeling a quiet comfort in his presence. In that moment, the plane, the flight, the long journey ahead, and the complex lives they led outside those tiny seats all seemed a little lighter. Two strangers had met by chance, and through nothing more than a shared human moment, they had begun a story neither would forget. The rest of the flight stretched on, filled with small, quiet moments of conversation, observation, and reflection. Outside, the sky remained dark, dotted with distant stars, a reminder that even in the vastness of life, small connections could shine brightly. And in the middle of that night, high above the earth, two strangers found themselves on a journey that neither expected, a journey that would quietly but profoundly change the course of both their lives. After the initial awkwardness of the head resting on his shoulder, the single father and the CEO had begun to find an unusual rhythm together. The hum of the airplane was constant, a soft background that made the little conversations feel private, almost like they existed in a world separate from the rest of the passengers. Every now and then, a light laugh or a shared glance passed between them, breaking the silence of the long flight. The man looked at her quietly, noticing the subtle signs of fatigue. Her sharp suit had softened in the creases from hours of sitting, her hair slightly tousled, and her eyes carried the weight of relentless responsibility. In that moment, she wasn't the leader of a major company. She wasn't the woman people whispered about in the business world. She was simply someone exhausted, someone human, and that realization made him feel an unexpected warmth toward her. She, in turn, observed him with gentle curiosity. He was not rich or famous, but there was a dignity in the way he carried himself. His hands were strong but worn, his posture careful but relaxed. The quiet determination in his eyes suggested a life lived through challenges, a life of responsibility and of small victories. She could see the love he carried for someone else, even if it was invisible to the world. The little sketch he had shown her before, drawn by his daughter, was proof of a dedication far greater than most people ever knew. The small talk gradually evolved into a deeper conversation. She asked about the reason for his trip, and he explained the importance of the interview he was heading to. It wasn't just a job. It was a chance to provide a better life for his daughter, a step toward stability and hope. He spoke softly, carefully choosing words that conveyed determination without complaint. She listened, fascinated by the depth of his commitment. Most people she met only spoke of ambition for themselves, but here was someone whose every action was for another. He asked her about her work, curious but careful not to overstep. She hesitated at first, unsure how much to reveal. In the past, she had learned to keep conversations shallow, to protect her privacy and maintain her image. But something about his quiet interest encouraged honesty. She spoke of her company, of the challenges she faced, of decisions that kept her awake at night. She shared frustrations, small victories, and the rare moments of satisfaction when things went right. He listened intently, asking thoughtful questions, making her feel heard in a way that was rare for someone in her position. Time passed, measured by the faint hum of the engines and the occasional announcement over the intercom. Outside, darkness stretched endlessly, stars twinkling faintly in the distance. Inside, a connection was quietly forming. They laughed softly at shared stories, exchanged ideas, and allowed themselves small moments of vulnerability. The single father spoke of his daughter's routines, bedtime stories, the small traditions he kept alive despite his busy life. She shared memories from her childhood, of growing up in a competitive environment where rest was a luxury and personal moments were often overlooked. At one point, a flight attendant walked past and glanced at them, curiosity evident in her eyes. She noticed the CEO resting beside the man, and a few other passengers glanced as well. Whispers floated quietly through the cabin. Some passengers assumed they were a couple or related in some way. Phones were subtly lifted, though no one was overtly recording. The single father felt a small twinge of discomfort, knowing how appearances could mislead. But he remained composed, focusing instead on the conversation and the moment. The CEO seemed oblivious to the whispers, absorbed in the quiet humanity of exchange. As the hours passed, small gestures of care and attention emerged. The single father adjusted his position slightly whenever she seemed uncomfortable, offering silent reassurance. She, in return, smiled when he shared stories about his daughter, small achievements and funny moments that made the long hours feel lighter. It was a quiet partnership, neither demanding anything from the other, both simply existing in a shared space of trust and understanding. The conversation soon turned reflective. They spoke about dreams deferred, about sacrifices made for family, and about the small acts of courage that often went unnoticed. He explained how his life had changed after losing his wife, the struggle of balancing work and parenting, and the constant effort to create moments of joy for his daughter despite exhaustion and financial limitations. She listened, nodding, understanding in a way that surprised her. In her world, people rarely shared such raw honesty. Here was someone who had lived through hardship and still carried hope, a person who had endured loss but remained compassionate. In response, she shared her own experiences, the pressures of running a company, and the isolation that often came with leadership. She spoke about the expectations placed upon her by society and the relentless drive required to maintain success. He listened, genuinely interested, not with envy or judgment, but with a simple respect that made her feel seen. It was a conversation without pretense, devoid of the masks they both often wore in their respective lives. The airplane cabin, suspended in the night sky, became a place of honesty and quiet reflection. A gentle turbulence shook the plane slightly, and both of them adjusted in their seats. She sighed softly, grateful for the human connection that made the long flight feel lighter. He offered a small comment about how these journeys often force people to slow down, to reflect, and she smiled, appreciating the observation. It was remarkable how two strangers, brought together by chance, could find understanding and companionship in such an ordinary setting. As the night deepened, they shared moments of silence as well. Words were not always necessary. A glance, a small smile, a quiet laugh. These small interactions held weight, building a foundation of mutual respect and empathy. He thought about his daughter, the reasons he worked tirelessly, and the sacrifices that often went unnoticed. She thought about her company, her employees, and the rare moments when she could truly rest and connect with another human being without the barrier of status or expectation. Food trays were passed, and both opted for light snacks, sharing a quiet joke about airline food that made them laugh softly. The shared laughter, simple and genuine, broke through the stress of their lives and reminded them that even amidst responsibility and exhaustion, joy could be found in small moments. The single father reflected on how rare it was to meet someone who could understand without needing explanation or proof, and the CEO realized how refreshing it was to be treated with kindness rather than reverence. As the flight progressed, their stories intertwined in subtle ways. He spoke about the little victories that made his hard days worthwhile, like hearing his daughter laugh after a long day, or successfully managing a difficult situation at work. She responded with similar anecdotes from her world, about employees who inspired her or moments when a small decision made a meaningful impact. These shared stories, though from very different lives, resonated with each other. It was a reminder that despite differences in status, wealth, or profession, the human experience often carried universal truths. Occasionally, she glanced out the window at the faint glow of distant cities below, reflecting on the world beyond her boardroom. He followed her gaze and imagined the lives of those unseen people, wondering about their stories, their struggles, and their triumphs. The connection between them deepened not through words alone, but through a shared awareness of life's fragility and beauty. In that suspended moment, the airplane felt less like a machine and more like a bridge between worlds, carrying two people who would not have met otherwise but whose paths had aligned at the perfect time. By the middle of the flight, they had established a rhythm. Conversation flowed naturally between pauses of quiet contemplation. He shared small details about his daughter's dreams, her laughter, and the challenges they faced together. She, in turn, shared reflections about leadership, responsibility, and the rare moments when she could pause and breathe. The dialogue was sincere, without ego or competition, a simple exchange of stories and perspectives that brought comfort to both. When a minor announcement from the flight attendant came, asking passengers to secure their belongings, they complied almost simultaneously, sharing a small smile over the unspoken coordination. It was a tiny reminder of shared humanity and the little synchronizations that happen when people pay attention to each other. The air was filled with a low murmur of other passengers, but around them, a sense of quiet understanding persisted. As the hours passed and the night wore on, the connection solidified. The single father realized that the kindness he had extended by allowing her to rest had opened a door to meaningful conversation. The CEO understood that in a world full of obligations, meetings, and deadlines, moments like this were rare and precious. They were both learning that the ordinary could become extraordinary simply by being present and attentive to another person. The darkness outside deepened, and the faint glow from the cabin lights softened. They shared small laughs over minor inconveniences, exchanged thoughts about travel, and allowed themselves moments of silence filled with comfort rather than awkwardness. The single father reflected on how unusual it was to meet someone so different from him, yet find common ground so easily. The CEO contemplated the rarity of genuine human connection in her world of constant transactions and obligations. By the time the flight reached its midpoint, a mutual understanding had been established. The single father no longer felt the awkwardness of the initial encounter, and the CEO had discovered a quiet joy in being treated as a person rather than a title. The hours ahead still held challenges, but for now, they were simply two humans sharing a space, learning from each other, and finding solace in an unexpected connection. When the flight attendant offered beverage, they both politely declined, choosing instead to continue their conversation, which had become a lifeline against the monotony and fatigue of long travel. The dialogue had grown deeper, moving from superficial topics to reflections on life, responsibility, and hope. Each story shared carried a weight, each smile a small acknowledgement of the human spirit. The plane continued its journey through the night sky, carrying its passengers toward their destinations. The single father thought about his daughter, her hopes, and his dream for her, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. The CEO considered her company, her responsibilities, and the rare clarity that came from listening and connecting with someone without judgment. Together in the quiet, moving world above the earth, they were both changed by the simple act of sharing space and attention. In those long hours, they discovered a subtle truth. Meaningful connection doesn't require fame, wealth, or circumstance. It requires presence, empathy, and a willingness to see another person fully. And in that realization, the flight became more than a journey through the skies. It became a journey toward understanding, respect, and the quiet power of human kindness. The flight continued, stretching through the night sky, when an unexpected announcement jolted the passengers awake. A medical emergency had occurred a few rows back, and the flight crew asked if there was anyone with medical training on board. The voice over the intercom was calm but urgent, and a wave of tension spread quickly through the cabin. Some passengers murmured nervously. Others glanced anxiously at their neighbors. But the single father felt a small, steady resolve settle in his chest. He hesitated only a moment before raising his hand. Memories of his past medical training surfaced. The classes he had taken, the skills he had practiced before life had redirected him to other responsibilities. It had been years since he had been in a situation like this, but instinct took over. He moved quickly toward the front of the cabin, past rows of curious and anxious faces, his mind focused solely on the person in need. The CEO watched quietly from her seat. She felt a mix of surprise and admiration. This quiet man, who had seemed so ordinary in the hours before, was now stepping forward with confidence and calm authority. She saw his hand steady as he checked the patient's pulse, listened carefully to their breathing, and began giving instructions to the crew. His voice was calm, clear, and firm, a voice that instantly reassured both the staff and the other passengers. She couldn't help but be impressed. It was a side of him she had never expected, and it revealed a depth of character far beyond first impressions. Passengers nearby began to notice. Some whispered in astonishment, while others watched in silence, captivated by the calm efficiency of the man who had once seemed just another passenger. The CEO's initial admiration deepened into respect, as she realized that this man's courage and composure would result of years of unseen responsibility and quiet determination. He moved methodically, speaking gently to the distressed family members, explaining each step and keeping everyone informed without causing panic. Minutes stretched, but under his guidance, the situation began to stabilize. The crew followed his instructions carefully. The passengers remained calm, and the faint fear that had gripped the cabin began to fade. The passenger in distress showed signs of improvement, their breathing more even, their color returning to normal. The father's experience, though not recent, had prepared him for this moment, and he executed each action with precision and empathy. When the immediate danger passed, the cabin breathed a collective sigh of relief. Passengers clapped softly, some offering words of gratitude. The flight attendants thanked him profusely, and even the passenger who had been in distress offered a shaky, grateful smile. The single father simply nodded, acknowledging the thanks without fanfare, his focus returning to the calm of the cabin and the continued flight ahead. The CEO felt a newfound admiration for him. She saw not just a tired father trying to do his best, but a capable, composed, and selfless individual. She realized that life's challenges had forged in him a strength that was quiet but undeniable. For her, someone accustomed to being the center of attention and the decision-maker, it was humbling to witness someone act purely out of compassion and duty without concern for recognition or status. When he returned to his seat, she greeted him with a small smile. "I didn't know you had that kind of training," she said softly. He shrugged, a modest gesture. "I studied it a long time ago. Life just took me in another direction. But I guess some things stay with you." Her eyes reflected a mixture of surprise and respect. "You were amazing, calm, efficient, and kind. Not everyone could do what you just did." He smiled quietly, feeling a sense of fulfillment. It was not about praise, but about helping someone when it mattered most. The flight had suddenly transformed from a long, ordinary journey into something meaningful. This incident had revealed the essence of character, showing that courage and compassion often existed in ordinary people, quietly and without announcement. For the remainder of the flight, there was a subtle shift between them. Their earlier conversation continued, but now it was layered with a deeper understanding. She saw him not just as a man struggling to create a better life for his daughter, but as someone with profound capability and integrity. He saw her not just as a powerful CO, but as a person who, despite immense responsibility, could still pause and appreciate simple human qualities. They talked about life in a way that felt honest and unguarded. He shared more about his past experiences, the moments that had shaped him, and the challenges of raising a child alone. She spoke of the demands of leadership, the weight of making decisions that affected countless lives, and the rare moments of doubt that everyone in her position eventually faced. The conversation was not about impressing each other or exchanging titles. It was a genuine sharing of experiences and insights. They laughed softly at small, relatable frustrations, like the unpredictability of air travel or the quirks of people in stressful situations. There was a warmth that grew, subtle but undeniable, born from shared humanity rather than circumstance. The single father reflected on how remarkable it was to meet someone from such a different world who could see and appreciate his struggles without judgment. The CEO realized that kindness, courage, and empathy were qualities that transcended social or professional hierarchies. As the flight continued, she asked him about his daughter in more detail, curious about the small joys and routines that made his life meaningful. He described her personality, the little habits that made her unique, and the ways he tried to ensure she felt loved and supported. She listened intently, noticing the pride in his voice, and felt a connection to this tiny, unseen part of his life. For the first time in weeks, her mind wandered away from spreadsheets and deadlines, focusing instead on the simple beauty of human relationships. The conversation turned to dreams and aspirations. He spoke about the goals he put on hold, the ambitions he had sacrificed to ensure stability and happiness for his daughter. She shared her own experiences of ambition, the sacrifices she had made, and the moments when she wished for a simpler life. Their dialogue revealed parallels between lives that seemed so different on the surface, showing that struggles, hopes, and a desire to do good were universal experiences. Time passed quickly despite the long hours. The earlier emergency had left a lasting impression, a reminder of the unpredictability of life and the importance of readiness, compassion, and calm. They discussed how people often underestimated others based on appearance, status, or circumstance, realizing that true character is revealed not in routine moments, but in times of pressure and need. It was a shared reflection that deepened their respect for one another and created a quiet bond. The airplane hummed steadily, carrying them forward through the night. Outside, the world was dark and vast, dotted with distant lights far below. Inside, the cabin felt intimate, a small space where two lives intersected in meaningful ways. The single father felt a growing sense of confidence, inspired not by accolades or promises, but by the recognition of his ability to act with skill and empathy. The CEO felt a renewed sense of perspective, reminded that leadership also involved observing, learning, and appreciating the strengths in others. Occasionally, they shared moments of silence, comfortable and reflective, each processing the events and the emotions of the evening. No words were needed to acknowledge the significance of what had happened. The crisis had revealed hidden strengths and forged a quiet understanding between them. The single father appreciated her listening and recognition, and the CEO appreciated his humility and competence. Both recognized that this shared experience would linger in memory far longer than the flight itself. As the night progressed, conversation drifted to small, lighter topics. They exchanged thoughts on travel experiences, favorite books, and the small comforts that made life more bearable during challenging times. Laughter emerged naturally, a soft and genuine sound that contrasted with the stress of the earlier emergency. These small moments of joy were a reminder that even amidst difficulties, human connection could create moments of warmth and relief. By the time the flight reached its midpoint, a subtle transformation had occurred. The single father no longer saw himself as just another passenger. He understood that his actions and choices had a tangible impact, not just for the immediate situation, but in the way they connected him with someone he might never have met otherwise. The CEO no longer saw him as just a man seated next to her. She recognized a person of quiet strength, resilience, and depth, a man whose character shone brightly when circumstances called for it. The rest of the flight stretched onward, and the atmosphere between them had changed from polite conversation to a shared understanding and respect. They continued to talk, to reflect, and to share glimpses of their inner lives. There was no pretense, no need to impress, only the simple act of exchanging thoughts and recognizing value in each other. The airplane, suspended in the darkness above the earth, became a space for connection, reflection, and quiet learning. The single father reflected on the unexpected ways life presented opportunities for growth, courage, and meaningful interaction. He realized that simple acts of kindness and readiness could change not just the immediate moment, but the perception and understanding between people. The CEO reflected on the power of presence, empathy, and humility in leadership, understanding that recognizing the strengths in others could be as impactful as making decisions herself. The night continued, and with it, the journey through both the sky and the evolving human connection. Each moment, conversation, and reflection became a thread in a story that neither had anticipated, but both would carry with them. In the quiet hum of the airplane, two lives intertwined through courage, compassion, and mutual respect, creating the foundation for events that were yet to unfold and experiences that would quietly but profoundly shape the rest of their stories. After the emergency had been handled and the cabin returned to calm, the single father and the CEO settled back into their seats. The atmosphere between them quietly shifted. The crisis had revealed something essential about both of them: his courage and calm, her capacity to appreciate the strength in others without judgment. There was a subtle, unspoken understanding that had formed, a bridge between two very different lives. The CEO, still impressed by how he had handled the situation, leaned back in her seat and asked him gently, "How did you learn to stay so calm under pressure?" He paused, considering his answer. "Life teaches you," he said simply. "There's a lot you can't prepare for. But when someone needs help, you don't think about fear. You just act. You do what you can." She nodded thoughtfully, recognizing the truth in his words. In her world, most people had to act under pressure constantly, but few did so with the kind of humility and empathy he had shown. There was no desire to be recognized, no need for praise, just a steady willingness to do what was right. Curiosity got the better of her, and she asked about his life outside the flight. He hesitated briefly, then opened up about raising his daughter alone. He spoke about the challenges, the moments of doubt, and the overwhelming responsibility of being both mother and father. He told her about the small routines that made their lives meaningful, the bedtime stories, the little drawings, and the small celebrations that kept hope alive. She listened intently, genuinely interested, her attention unwavering. There was no interruption, no distraction, just presence. She could feel the love in his words, the quiet pride he carried, and it softened her own rigid perspective. For someone used to controlling outcomes, making decisions for entire organizations, and leading people, it was refreshing to witness strength that didn't rely on power or title. Encouraged by her interest, he shared more about the sacrifices he had made, the opportunities he had turned down, and the struggles of keeping a young life safe and happy. She asked questions that revealed her genuine desire to understand. How does he find time to balance work and parenting? What keeps him motivated when life feels overwhelming? How does he teach his daughter values without having much time for anything else? Their conversation flowed naturally, deepening with each shared story. She found herself laughing softly at his anecdotes, admiring the way he found joy despite hardship. And he, in turn, felt a quiet sense of relief talking to someone who listened without judgment, who treated him like a human being and not just a stranger on a plane or an ordinary passenger. At one point, she finally shared more about herself, not as a CEO, not as someone whose decisions affected thousands, but as a person who carried a burden of responsibility that often left her lonely. She talked about the isolation that came with leadership, the constant decision-making, and the rare moments of doubt. Her words were honest and raw, a glimpse into a life she rarely shared outside of the boardroom. He listened, fascinated by the human beneath the professional. He asked thoughtful questions, not to impress or gain favor, but out of genuine interest. He asked about her motivations, her experiences, and the lessons she had learned from her journey. She responded openly, feeling understood in a way that was unusual for her. For hours, The roles of power and status faded, replaced by a simple, meaningful dialogue between two people sharing their lives. Time passed quickly, measured by the small, quiet moments that often carry more weight than grand gestures. They exchanged reflections on the choices they had made, the lessons they had learned, and the moments that had defined them. He spoke about patience, perseverance, and hope. She spoke about resilience, responsibility, and clarity. The conversation created a subtle bond, grounded in respect, empathy, and understanding. Laughter became more frequent, soft and genuine. They joked about the minor annoyances of travel, the quirks of passengers, and the unpredictability of life on the road. In the humor, they found comfort, a break from the weight of their respective responsibilities. The flight, once a routine journey, had become a shared experience, a time to reflect, connect, and understand. As the hours passed, the CEO looked at him with a new perspective. She saw a man who had faced hardship with courage, who acted selflessly in moments that mattered, and who carried love and dedication as quietly as most people carried their coffee. She realized that life's value wasn't measured in wealth, title, or recognition, but in the small, consistent actions that define character. He, in turn, began to see her differently. She was more than the CEO he had read about or glimpsed in media reports. She was a person who had worked tirelessly, sacrificed personal time, and carried enormous responsibility. And yet, she was capable of listening, reflecting, and connecting on a human level. Their initial encounter, awkward and unexpected, had grown into something meaningful, a mutual understanding that transcended their different worlds. The single father shared a story about a small victory with his daughter, a moment that might seem trivial to anyone else, but held profound significance for him. She listened, captivated by the sincerity, the depth of emotion, and the authenticity. He didn't exaggerate or embellish. He spoke from the heart. She responded with her own stories, moments where small decisions or simple actions had rippled into greater outcomes. Their shared storytelling created a rhythm, a pattern of exchange that felt natural and unforced. As the night continued, they paused in quiet reflection. No words were needed to acknowledge the impact of the earlier emergency, the conversation, or the subtle connection that had formed. They shared a few more laughs, reflected on lessons from life, and allowed themselves to simply exist in the moment, free from judgment or expectation. The airplane hummed steadily, a constant reminder of movement, progress, and the journey ahead. Eventually, the CEO turned in with a small, serious smile. "Would you mind if I asked for your resume?" she said. Her tone was not commanding, but gentle, almost hesitant, revealing that this was not a request made lightly. She had seen something in him, not just competence, but character, resilience, and integrity. He looked surprised, a flicker of disbelief crossing his face. "You mean for a job?" he asked cautiously. "Yes," she replied simply. "Not because I feel sorry for you. Not because I want to do a favor. But because I believe you have skills, experience, and perspective that could make a difference. I'd like to see what you've done and consider opportunities where you could contribute." For the first time in a long flight, he felt a surge of hope. It was tangible, warm, and unlike anything he'd felt in years. He realized that the chance encounter, the conversation, and even the emergency had led to this unexpected opportunity. It was a turning point, a moment where human connection, courage, and empathy had combined to open a door that had previously seemed closed. They spent the remaining hours of the flight discussing logistics, opportunities, and possibilities. The conversation was practical now, but still carried the warmth and trust that had developed over the previous hours. They exchanged contact information, promised a follow-up, and shared a quiet acknowledgement of the unexpected bond formed in the sky. When the plane finally began its descent, the mood was reflective but hopeful. Both of them understood that the flight had been more than just a journey from one city to another. It had been a journey into understanding, respect, and recognition of human character. They had shared stories, faced an emergency, and created a bond that was rare and meaningful. As the plane landed and the cabin prepared for disembarkation, they exchanged a final look, a small smile that conveyed gratitude, recognition, and possibility. The single father carried with him renewed hope, a sense of validation, and the anticipation of opportunities ahead. The CEO carried a reminder of the value of empathy, the strength of character in others, and the quiet lessons that come from genuine human connection. The airplane had brought together two very different lives, and in the small, extraordinary moments of that night, both were changed. One would find new opportunities and hope, and the other would rediscover the power of listening, understanding, and recognizing the remarkable qualities in those often overlooked. And neither would forget the impact of those hours spent together above the world, where human connection, courage, and empathy had quietly but profoundly reshaped their perspectives. After the plane landed, passengers began gathering their belongings, and the hum of conversation filled the cabin once again. The single father gathered his things, his heart racing with anticipation and hope. What had started as an ordinary flight had become extraordinary, not because of status or titles, but because of courage, kindness, and unexpected human connection. He walked down the aisle, glancing briefly at the CEO who was still seated, finishing a few last emails on her tablet. She looked up, smiled warmly, and gave him a small nod. The gesture was simple, but it carried the acknowledgement of the bond they had formed during the flight. He realized that what had happened in the air was a turning point in both their lives, a quiet but profound shift. Days later, he received an email from her. She had asked for his resume during the flight, and now she was following through. The message was concise but filled with opportunity. She invited him for an interview at her company, a chance to use his skills in a meaningful way, to contribute and to build stability for his daughter. His excitement was tempered by disbelief. It felt surreal that an encounter on a plane could lead to such an opportunity. The interview process was thorough but fair. He wasn't given special treatment because of the flight incident. He was evaluated on his skills, experience, and perspective, and he approached it with the same dedication and authenticity he had shown during the emergency. Each conversation with the team reinforced that he belonged there, that his life experience and practical skills were valuable. The CEO observed him not as a favor recipient, but as a professional whose contributions could genuinely matter. He was eventually offered a position in the company's patient care innovation department. The role came with flexible hours, opportunities for growth, and a supportive environment that allowed him to balance work and family life. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of security and hope for the future. He thought about his daughter and smiled, imagining how this change would positively impact her life, her education, and the stability she deserved. When he brought his daughter to the company's family open house, she ran to the halls excitedly, her laughter filling the space. She hugged her father tightly, proud of his achievements. The CEO watched from a distance, smiling quietly. She had witnessed a moment of pure human strength and connection, and it had left an impression on her own perspective of leadership and life. She began implementing programs in her company to support single parents and recognize hidden talent, inspired by the courage and dedication she had witnessed firsthand. The single father and the CEO remained in contact, not as employer and employee alone, but as two people who had shared a unique journey of understanding and mutual respect. Their story became a quiet inspiration for the team, a reminder that true leadership involves recognizing the potential and character in others, and that courage, empathy, and kindness can change lives in ways no one expects. The lessons of that flight stayed with both of them. For the father, it was a reminder that perseverance, humility, and readiness to act can open doors and create opportunities even in the most unlikely circumstances. For the CEO, it was a reminder that listening, observing, and valuing human qualities beyond titles and appearances can bring fresh perspective, innovation, and a sense of fulfillment. Years later, both would look back on that night not just as a flight from one city to another, but as a turning point that shaped their lives in profound ways. The single father found stability, professional fulfillment, and joy in watching his daughter grow. The CEO discovered the importance of empathy, human connection, and recognizing the strength in people around her. And they both remembered that sometimes life's most meaningful changes happen quietly, in small acts of courage and kindness, high above the ground where two strangers once shared a seat and a story that would forever alter the paths of their lives. It was a story of hope, resilience, and the extraordinary power of ordinary moments. A single act of understanding, a willingness to act in kindness, and the courage to connect on a human level had created ripples that neither of them could have predicted. And in that, they discovered that life often changes not in grand gestures or planned meetings, but in fleeting moments of empathy, courage, and simple human presence.